There are a variety of different ways that you could save and invest your money, from things like pensions, 401ks, IRAs, and brokerage accounts, and a variety of different ways you could save and invest. And a big reason why people are struggling, or most people are struggling, when it comes to either reaching a financial goal, whether it's retirement, financial independence, or whatever it is they're trying to achieve, is they're not aware or they don't know of all the different ways to do that. And I'm going to cover specifically in this video the differences and advantages between a 401k, a traditional 401k, and a Roth 401k. Hi, my name is Pascal Madigan, and you're watching the Financial Ownership Podcast. If you followed much of my content or you watched some of my videos in the past, you've probably heard some of my opinions on what I believe about the traditional 401k, the risk of it, and why I'm not too big of a fan of it. But nonetheless, there are some people that watch content like this that they want to learn about the pros and cons and how they could use the 401k maybe as a supplement to what they're already doing, or use it to maximize retirement income. So I'm gonna go a little bit into detail on the benefits between in the different types of disadvantages between a 401k, a traditional 401k, and a Roth 401k. And it's really important to understand the difference, because this could be potentially a really good resource for you if you're trying to maximize your retirement income. So the way a traditional 401k would work, it's basically tax deferred income. So let's say, an example, I make $60,000 a year and my employer matches 5% of my income. So what that basically means is I get to take the tax deduction on my income for $60,000, and since the employer matches 5% of my income, that's $3,000. For the $3,000 I contribute, my employer will match that full amount and put another $3,000. So in total, every single year, if I decide to take advantage of a plan like that, I basically get $6,000 invested into whatever 401k fund I decide to choose. And the thing about it is, I'm not getting taxed on it right now, but I'm getting taxed on it later on. But generally, if you think that you're gonna stay with your employer, and that's one thing to if you want to stay with your employer, it's good to take the match. But a lot of times people people make the common mistake of they don't have a long-term vision of staying with that employer, but when they leave, they realize that match that the employer is contributing doesn't go with them. It doesn't stay. The employer basically keeps the money, because a lot of times companies have a certain amount of, or a certain period of time that you have to keep working for them in order for you to keep that match and basically make that your money. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you plan on leaving your employer, you might want to rethink about the 401k, because that money that they're matching might not be yours if you don't stay a certain period of time. And obviously, every employer is different, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what that period of time is. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, depending on what company you work for. But basically, what you're doing is just deferring your taxes until later. You're not paying taxes now, you're paying taxes later. And the risk of that is you don't know what taxes are going to be in the future. So your 401k, let's say you save for 30 years or investing for 30 years in that 401k, you could potentially have something looking like $500,000 in that 401k, the traditional 401k. And the thing is, what's variable and what you don't know is the tax rate that you're going to land on in retirement. And the only thing I could really do is give you a history of what taxes look like. So there have been several different periods in the United States in the last century where the tax rates, the top tax rates at least, have been over 70%. So that doesn't necessarily mean that your 401k money will ever get to that point where it's at the top tax rate. But at the same time, that's going to gradually increase the lower tax rates up as well. So what you projected, or what you thought you would have for retirement, isn't as much as you projected, because the tax rates increase. That's going to be more of your money, your retirement money, going to the government. So just to give you a heads up on how high taxes have been in the past, 3 times in the last century, basically, tax rates have been over 7%, and there has been one time where taxes were about 94% at the top tax rate. people over there at that time were making $200,000 in income, but and if you look back and say this was in 1944, people had to make $200,000 in income in order to pay that high tax rate. And to keep in mind, that's about close to it's over $1 million today, 200,000 back in 1944, because obviously when you adjust for inflation, 200,000 was worth a lot more back then than it is now. The United States has a progressive tax system, meaning that as you make more money, you get you climb higher in terms of your marginal or your marginal tax bracket. Even though a lot of people weren't paying 94% of taxes, there were a lot of different step ups to that point. So the lower tax rates might have been a little bit higher, even though people weren't necessarily, or most people weren't paying 94% in taxes. And basically, if you look at today's tax history, and I've mentioned this many times in my previous video, and I kind of mention it a lot on purpose because a lot of people don't realize that taxes are historically low. So the fact that the taxes are historically low, using a strategy for tax deferral is very risky. Not because of the mutual funds that are invested in the 401k, but the tax risk that's associated with the 401k. Because if you look at tax rates today, they're historically low in comparison to what they have been in the past. So what you could potentially be doing by using a traditional 401k strategy is you could be deferring yourself into a higher tax bracket in the future. And if your goal is to maximize retirement income, it's kind of contradicting your goal, because if tax rates are higher in the future, you're going to have less money to retire on, obviously, because tax rates are kind of variable. And if you look at the situation in the U.S., if you look at the situation of the U.S. being at all-time high debt and unfunded liabilities, massive inflation, and no trend looking like the U.S. is going to spend less. It's a lot of risk you're taking when you use a traditional 401k strategy, and a lot of people aren't aware of it, or aware that the fact that it is risky, because a lot of people, maybe like friends, colleagues, mom and dad, invest in a 401k, and you just assume that, okay, it's a good strategy to put your money in, but it definitely comes with a lot more thought, and you have to think about the situation in the economy today. So that's basically how a traditional 401k works. The way a Roth 401k works is you're using after-tax dollars to fund your Roth. So basically what you would do is you would pay taxes now, and then you won't be subject to taxes later on. So there's a few things you want to keep in mind when it comes to it. That probably means you're going to have to either fund your Roth less or put in more money than you otherwise would have, because you're going to have less money, because you're not getting that tax deduction no longer when you're using a Roth 401k strategy, because you're paying taxes up front. So that might mean you're either contributing less to your retirement account, or you might have to contribute a little bit more just to make up that difference, because of the fact that you don't get the tax deduction using a Roth 401k. Well, the contribution you put in, let's say the employer still matches that same 5%, you make $60,000 a year. The contribution you put in won't get taxed. So that $3,000 you put in is tax-free, because you already pay taxes on it, and you won't pay taxes in the future. Now, the contribution your employer puts in, that $3,000 your employer puts in, is treated like a traditional 401k. So you don't pay taxes on the contribution that your employer puts in. It's tax deferred. So later on, that contribution will get taxed at ordinary income tax later on for the contribution. Whether you use a Roth 401k or a traditional 401k, the employer match will always be taxable. Basically, if you end up getting the same $500,000 accumulated within that Roth 401k strategy that you're using along with the employer match, half of that will be tax-free. So if you accumulated $500,000, that means that $250,000 of it will be taxable, because that's part of your employer's contribution, and the other $250,000 won't be taxable because it's in a Roth 401k strategy. And the thing is, the Roth 401k has higher contributions limits than, say, a traditional Roth IRA. Yes, the Roth IRA gives you more options in terms of what you can invest in, But the Roth 401k, you could contribute up to, I believe the contribution amount is around $19,000 that you could contribute into your Roth 401k. And obviously, for retirement income, if you're trying to maximize tax-free benefit, it could be a good option depending on the type of funds that the employer has for you to invest in. And it's something to look into if you're trying to maximize retirement income. But to sum it up, if you're concerned about retirement and you're trying to save and invest for retirement, the 401k, the traditional 401k, has a lot more risk associated with it because of the tax variable in the future. You don't know what taxes are going to be in the future, so you're taking a lot of risk, a lot of tax risk when it comes to using a traditional 401k. With the Roth 401k, it's a lot more predictable. The amount that your employer contributes is kind of just extra. There's nothing you could do about that. That will always be taxable as a traditional 401k is taxable. But that extra amount that you put in to your Roth 401k won't be taxable. And it gives you more predictability in terms of what you'll have for retirement. Now, one thing to really pay attention to is the economy. Right now, tax rates are at historic lows. So it makes the most sense, looking at it in a logical perspective, to use a Roth 401k because taxes are at historical lows right now. That doesn't mean that later on in the future, a 401k might not make sense. It's just that right now, looking at the situation in the US, it doesn't really make too much sense, because there's a good chance you could be deferring yourself to higher tax brackets. So it's really important to pay attention to the economy, or have someone who could give you advice and walk you through different investment strategies and guide you through making decisions that make the most sense based on today. Like, for example, when the 401k came out, it made a lot of sense, or when the 401k was first introduced into the economy and everything, it made a lot of sense to use a 401k strategy because a lot of people were paying higher taxes. People were paying 70%. It makes sense to defer your taxes to a later date if the tax brackets are high now, because there's a good chance that taxes could be low in the future. So it might not make sense to use a Roth strategy in some other point in time. But today, it just would make more sense if you're trying to maximize retirement income to use a Roth strategy just based on what's happening today. If you're looking for other tax-effective asset classes, I'm gonna have another video at the end. I highly recommend watching it. You're gonna get a ton of value out of that video and learning about how to maximize things like retirement income and have excellent liquidity with your money without having to wait until 15 and a half. So watching that video I have at the end will definitely give you a lot of guidance in terms of tax-free assets. If you found some value in this video, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe. As always, I leave a link in the description below. There's a link tree. You can feel free to either book a call with me to ask me any questions about personal finance or investing or things of that sort, or you can leave a comment below asking me a question. Thank you.